Hello, friends. If you are just hopping on today, that means you probably missed being with us this past Sunday, and we missed you, but I'm glad you're here and with us in this way. I just got back from vacation, and so being away gave me a chance to just think about the life that we share at Neatart's Friends Church, and sure thankful for you all. All right, jumping into what we're doing today. We're talking about a personal crisis. What is it that builds up to a crisis, a personal crisis, like a crisis of self or a crisis of faith? You may have heard people talk about like a midlife crisis, but there are all kinds, so many varieties of personal crisis that people face, where people find themselves saying, I am not okay with my life. Like they say, if I had to read my own life story, that is not a book that I would enjoy. They say, I don't like my own life story. I don't like my own autobiography. And so they come to a point when they say, is this all there is? They start asking, have I been looking at life completely wrong? And this is the making of a crisis. Crisis of faith, crisis of self, midlife crisis, you name it. These kinds of thoughts and feelings don't cause people usually to make like wild changes in a day. These kinds of thoughts build. They stack up on one another. They brew, they hum in the background until they are drowning everything else out. And of course, everyone's experience of a crisis is different, but underneath it all, something's missing from life. That's what's going on. There's some kind of pain that we cannot outrun, we cannot escape, or there's some kind of need that we are struggling to fill. We're trying to find what it is that we're seeking and even identify what we're seeking. And of course, the layers of need that we experience are so complex, it can be very difficult to even put our finger on what it is that we feel like we need. And so when all this stuff is brewing, it's like storm clouds that are far off on the horizon and changes in the air. Something is going to happen. When we don't like our own life story, we start exploring other options, but we don't do that in public because we're trying to figure out what it is that we are seeking. And so we do our searching in private. We try to keep our search in the back alleys, confidential, off the books, using the private browser. We do things, we try things that we wouldn't really want other people to see us checking out in this quest to find some kind of answer to the questions that we are asking. And we don't tell people how much we're suffering inside because how could they understand it when we ourselves are really trying to understand what is it that I'm looking for? It's like we're still trying to understand it. So how are you supposed to articulate it to someone else? And so we look into other jobs, other vocations, other relationships, other communities, other churches, other faiths, other escapes, substances, you name it. And we're asking, behind it all, we're saying, is this all there is? Because we have this feeling, which is, I don't like my own life story. Well, that brings us today to our gospel story. Our gospel story comes from Luke chapter 19. So here it is. Through the back alleys of Jericho, a figure was darting, running, staying in the shadows, out of sight. He would stop and he'd peer around the corner, and once he saw that the coast was clear, he would scurry on toward the edge of town. He didn't want anyone to see him. Men in ancient Palestine did not want to be caught running because for a man to run in ancient Palestine was humiliating. It was shameful. And so this man in the shadows, running through the back alleys of Jericho, was in the middle of a crisis. This background hum of questions was building. I don't like my own life story. Is this all there is? This man was the most hated man in all of Jericho. He was the chief tax collector in Jericho, one of the wealthiest cities in all of ancient Palestine. And here he was, the guy responsible for taxing everyone. Now, to gain that title, chief tax collector, it required a hardening of the soul. It meant that you had to become an oppressor. The pleas of poverty-stricken fathers and helpless widows couldn't be allowed to find a way in. You had to be able to twist the knife without being affected by the cries of the victim, so to speak. You could not have any chinks in your emotional armor. You couldn't care what anyone thought of you. You had to be able to tolerate all kinds of hostility because insults could come at any moment. The community was just looking for an opportunity to curse you and give you the finger. You were an extortioner, an oppressor, a traitor, a collaborator. And so anytime you entered a house, that home was considered unclean. You were like a walking virus in the community. Now, at the same time that you couldn't care what anyone thought, you had to be really good at reading people because you couldn't trust anyone. The religious authorities actually condoned lying to you. They said, yeah, you can lie to the chief tax collector. And so you had to assume everyone was lying to you. And of course, your work was dependent upon looking people straight in the face and lying to them. You were in charge of a motley band of employees, other tax collectors, who basically were unable to earn an income in any other way. And you were the one person responsible for paying the entire tax of the city of Jericho to the Roman Empire. That responsibility was on your shoulders. You were the only person who knew the exact amount that the Roman Empire required. And so that meant that it was up to you to determine how much tax each person in the city of Jericho could bear. And with the power of Roman soldiers, you were squeezing every last drop of money out of the people, whatever you thought they could bear. Market stalls, travelers, merchants, fisherfolk, toll booths, custom stations, farmers, bridges, gates, tradesmen, craftsmen, prostitutes, you taxed them all. And only you knew how much profit you were really making. And so you're hated by everyone. Money had to be able to buy happiness because you certainly weren't going to have very many friends. It was going to be really tough to find any kind of community. This was Zacchaeus, checking around the corners, running through the back alley, trying not to be seen. Now, normally Zacchaeus walked through the city in broad daylight. He could get anything he wanted. He was rich and he had the power of the Roman Empire behind him. So why is he running through town, scurrying around, trying not to be seen? Well, on this day, Jesus and his disciples were coming through town. They were on their way to Jerusalem. And so the city was buzzing with excitement. In fact, Jesus had already healed a blind man on his way into town. And so the city is just buzzing. The back alleys, of course, are empty because everyone's flocking to see Jesus. And Jesus intrigued Zacchaeus. Now, what if? What if someone like a chief tax collector was unhappy with his own life story? What if he looked at his life and he said, I have everything money can buy, and I'm still asking, is this all there is? What if he felt far from God? What if he felt like I still have holes in my soul? Something is missing from my life. What if the chief tax collector did experience a personal crisis, a crisis of faith, a crisis of self? It wasn't like there was an easy way out of the gig. It wasn't like you could just drop it all and the community would take you right back and start loving you. Would they? Well, Zacchaeus had heard about this new community that this guy Jesus was starting. The the tax collector Levi, he had been able to leave his tax booth because Jesus offered him a new community, a new family to be a part of. Society treated tax collectors like a virus in the community, but people said that this Jesus guy wasn't doing that. He was eating in the homes of the tax collectors regularly because he wanted to be with them. And so Zacchaeus wanted to see who this Jesus guy was. He wanted to see if he could get a read on him. He figured he was pretty good at reading people. But of course, the crowds of Jericho, they weren't about to let Zacchaeus get close to Jesus. And so everyone turned cold shoulders. They blocked his way. Zacchaeus is trying to come through. They weren't about to let him get through the crowd to actually see Jesus. And so that's why Zacchaeus was running, darting through the back alleys. Now, if anyone had been watching, they would have seen short little Zacchaeus come running out the far end of Jericho, running up the road towards Jerusalem. The only sycamore fig trees were out of town. They were up the road towards Jerusalem. They weren't in town. And if anyone had been watching, they would have seen Zacchaeus scrambling up one of those trees into the dense foliage, hiding himself behind the large leaves and the low branches. And if anyone had been watching, they would have been astonished. Now, in ancient Palestine, not only did men not run because it was shameful, they didn't climb trees because it was shameful. You didn't run, you didn't climb trees unless you wanted to completely humiliate yourself. And Zacchaeus, here he is running out of town, climbing a tree. He wants to see who this Jesus guy is without being seen. He doesn't want to be noticed. He wasn't ready for anyone in the community to know that their oppressor is struggling with his own wounds, with his own needs, that he has chinks in his emotional armor. The world is full of people who are running through back alleys and they're sneaking and they're searching for something. And they are not ready to let other people know that they have holes and empty spots and aches in their soul, that they are longing for a better way to tell the story of their life. And so you could look at them and say, they look hardened. They look heartless, tainted, dirty, corrupt. They look like they'll never change. Like they look, how could they change? And of course, those people stay away from the crowds who they know will judge them and reject them. And they stick to the back alleys, they stick to the hidden places. They're looking, they're seeking until some kind of an encounter. Here came Jesus out the far end of Jericho. He's headed to Jerusalem, and there's Zacchaeus up there in the tree hiding. And of course, here comes the entire town traipsing along behind Jesus. Guys, it's obvious Jesus is not going to spend the night in Jericho. So I'm sure Zacchaeus is saying, why can't you all go back into town? Just go home. He's not spending the night here. Leave Jesus alone with his disciples to walk up the road. Zacchaeus scrambled a little higher into the tree, trying to hide himself. If the townspeople realized he ran ahead and he climbed a tree, he would never hear the end of that shame. So as Jesus came closer to the tree, he stopped. He looked up, which of course made everyone else look up as well. Now, for anyone going through a crisis of faith or a personal crisis, they understand this situation just turned into a nightmare. It's called getting caught in the act. That's what this is called. You're longing for a better way to tell the story of your life. You are looking, you are searching, you are exploring, and maybe not in the right places. It's super vulnerable territory. You're looking into other jobs, vocations, relationships, communities, faiths, and you get caught in the act. That's what this moment is. You couldn't really paint a more vulnerable picture for Zacchaeus. He just was caught running ahead. Now they know, climbing a tree. And he's just shown the entire community that he does have chinks in his emotional armor, that there is something that he actually cares about. Otherwise, he wouldn't be sneaking and running and climbing trees. And you couldn't tee up a situation any better for the entire town to gang up on Zacchaeus. He stuck up a tree. There's something highly cathartic for the townspeople about seeing the chief tax collector, their oppressor, in such a vulnerable situation, stuck up a tree. How can they not just roll with laughter and crack jokes and humiliate him? Like tomorrow, yeah, he's gonna tax us and he's gonna hit us hard, but today is a good day. Look at that guy. And it would be frosting on the cake if Jesus threw out a good dig or two towards Zacchaeus. So while everyone else is looking up and all they see is a cathartic experience, a chance to get a few digs in, Jesus looks up and he sees a complex person who is on the edge of finding a new sense of self, finding a new way to tell the story of his life. And so Jesus says to Zacchaeus, he says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I gotta stay at your house today. I just have to. I must stay at your house today. Everyone gasps. Even Zacchaeus is surprised. Like Jesus already made it clear he's not staying in Jericho, except that now he is. And he's staying at Zacchaeus' house. So, in front of this entire community that doesn't want Zacchaeus and hates Zacchaeus and treats Zacchaeus like he's hardly human, like he's a dirty virus, here's Jesus who wants him. and is treating him like he's human and is treating him like he's someone who could be in his community. And I gotta stay with you. I just have to. He's inviting himself over. And joy rushes in. It fills all those empty holes inside of Zacchaeus. It's like when you have a dried out sponge that's just brittle and crusty, but you plunge it in to a dish pan full of water and it just softens and fills. Zacchaeus shimmied down the tree just as fast as he could to show Jesus his house, drawn like a magnet to Jesus. Now, no one had ever seen Zacchaeus smile like this before. Not that they were looking, but if they had been looking, they would have seen the tears forming in the corner of his eye. All they saw, alas, was the face of a heartless oppressor. And they all start muttering to one another, this Jesus guy, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner again. And as Zacchaeus walked along with Jesus back into town, back into his town, back into Jericho, the entire world began to look different. The streets of Jericho didn't look the same with Jesus and this community of disciples traipsing along. He knew all of these people of this town hated him, but now, as he looked, he was seeing things differently. How hard they were trying to survive in their world, how hard they were struggling and searching, just like he was. And as they entered into Zacchaeus' home, as Zacchaeus welcomed Jesus and the disciples in, it felt completely new to be in hospitality mode in his own home with Jesus as guest, simply serving Jesus a glass of wine, fruit, cheese, bread. It flooded his aching heart with something new, something he'd been missing for so long. This house full of things, full of wealth, had become so empty, so alone. But with Jesus here, with this community of disciples, it felt so full. For all these years, Zacchaeus had been taking. That's all he had been doing, using power to take from people who were hurting. Who knew it could feel so good, so healing to give? His dining room was full of disciples, men, women, children, from all different walks of life, lepers, tax collectors, prostitutes, social rejects, all talking and laughing, eating together, and they were setting into motion this process that had been happening, had been in the background for such a long time. Zacchaeus felt like a snake shedding its old dead skin. He felt this entirely new sense of self emerging. It was like, here is the real Zacchaeus. Here is the new Zacchaeus, the real Zacchaeus. He looked around this room at all of the things he used to value: his wealth, his fancy furniture, the wine glasses, the decorations, and it was like looking at this old dead shell of himself. He used to think that this wealth was what he wanted. He used to think his wealth was the story he wanted until he had it all and was asking, is this all there is? And now, as he looked around the room at all of his wealth, all he could see were the faces of the people that he had taken it from. People who were struggling and trying just as hard and as much as he was. And Zacchaeus realized he was finding a new way to tell the story of his life, to tell the story that he had been yearning for. The story that he was longing for, it was happening right in front of his eyes in his own dining room, his own living room. He looked at this space with these people and was saying, "This is what I want." And he stood up in the room and he raised a glass and he began with an old Hebrew narrative style. It was the way so many good stories began. He said, "Look, behold." He was finding a new way to reshape the story of his life. It's the way the story begins. "Look, behold, Lord, here and now I will give half of my possessions to the poor," which is what everyone knew Jesus called disciples to do. If I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. This is going to take an entire lifetime for him to live out these words that he was saying. How many hundreds of people would Zacchaeus have to face in one way or another and say, "I cheated you, and I'm the only one who even knows how much I cheated you. I caused you suffering and fear and pain and anger and anguish, and that's not the life I want for you. And that's not the life I want for me. And so I am paying you back. And I'm paying you back with extra, lots of extra, because I want a different story for us." How many people would Zacchaeus have to have that conversation with? Zacchaeus was done taking. He was ready to give. He was ready to face the people that he had oppressed and he had hurt, and he was ready to make reparations. He was ready to heal and mend and reconcile and begin his new story, his new life, new relationships. Now, as Zacchaeus made this announcement, Jesus didn't scrutinize. He didn't correct. He didn't preach. He didn't offer advice. He didn't theologize. Jesus celebrated. He said, "Today, salvation, rescue, healing has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham," which is, he's in the family, guys. For the Son of Man, that's Jesus' nickname for himself, the human, came to seek and to save the lost. And so, the man who had been trying to hold his old broken story together, who'd been running through the back streets of Jericho, found a new king. Jesus, he found a new community, the disciples, a new family. He found something that would enable him to finally heal and mend and reconcile and to live the story that he was longing for. Where do you find yourself in the story? Where do I find myself in the story? Our world is full of people who are aching, and there's Zacchaeus. In one way or another, they are looking for something that they have not yet identified, something that they haven't found. They're trying to escape a pain that they cannot outrun, and they might seem like they're far away, running through the back streets of town, but the truth is they want to see who Jesus is. Now, they aren't ready to face a community of judgment, that's for sure. That's why they're hiding. But they are longing for a better way to tell their story. And sadly, our world has crowds of people who, they are like the crowds in this story. They cannot stomach Jesus sharing space with people who they detest. And so they'll laugh when they see their enemies humiliated, and they'll complain when they see their enemies accepted. And at one point or another, with someone, we have been the crowd, meaning we have all been the person that someone in a crisis is hiding from. They are not ready for us to see what they're actually looking for because they're afraid of what we'll say. They're trying to find something. They may not have named it as Jesus, but they're trying to find something they're seeking, but they're hiding it from us. And then there are the disciples of Jesus. And the only thing they do is traipse around behind Jesus. They are learning from him for sure. And they find themselves in Zacchaeus' house, eating his food and talking and laughing. And you could say the disciples in the story don't do anything. But nearly every Zacchaeus in this world, every person who goes through a crisis and finds their way to Jesus and a new community will tell you that what helped them believe that a better life story was possible included laughing disciples who spent time with them, not doing anything, eating, drinking, laughing, sharing, just there. And then there's Jesus. We can't forget Jesus. He creates encounters with people who are trying to hide their pain, but Jesus creates encounters with them because Jesus sees what everyone else cannot see. And he changes his plans as he sees our needs. He doesn't follow everyone else's playbook. He celebrates each and every step that we take towards him. Jesus saves and rescues and heals. Love you, friends.